The video you are about to watch is from an old woodworking magazine that I published during the years of 2003 to approximately 2006. This was a very unique magazine. It was purely video content and it was distributed on DVDs. The magazine ran for approximately 3.5 years, and then due to financial concerns, we simply had to terminate the magazine. We moved on to other things over the last roughly 15 years. However, there has been a request to resurrect this content, so I've gone through the trouble to get the equipment, the products, everything I needed in order to bring this content back to life to share with everyone. Here on this YouTube channel, we'll be putting up approximately 100 to 120 of the original stories that appeared in that magazine. The magazine was called Woodworking at Home Magazine, and it was truly one of a kind in the world. I really hope you enjoy these videos, and please tell your friends about them.
Moving on to the sheet goods, I got started over at the panel saw by cross-cutting my plywood pieces to length. That makes them a little more manageable. Now I can go ahead and trim them to their proper width here at the table saw. As you've just seen, I've gone through and machined a series of dados, and those will receive the drawer runners to support our drawers. Now there's two 3/4 inch panels. One is birch plywood, the other is cherry plywood. And on the cherry plywood, I've only got cherry veneer on one of the two faces. And that face with the cherry veneer has just one groove, and that'll hold up the upper shelf. On the other side, we have a matching set of dados to match up with our birch plywood. And those will hold, the top one will hold the shelf, and the rest will hold the drawer runners. Now when machining them, if you do it on the table saw, only work about halfway on the board, then flip the board around and work from the bottom back up again. It's a little bit tricky getting your layout that way, but it's much safer than trying to run the dado with the fence all the way over. Another good option is to use your router. The front edges of our two carrier panels need to be edge banded with some cherry hardwood. So we'll be ripping that material up and fastening that on in a few moments. Now you also have to make another decision at this point. Now as I mentioned, my project is going to be stained, and here I've applied some stain on the birch plywood. Now this top area of your birch plywood panel is going to be exposed. That's the area up at the top where there's a shelf. Now if you want it to look perfectly like cherry, then you may have to remove some of this material here and laminate on a piece of 1/4 inch cherry plywood. And you can remove that material using a router, just working your way back and forth across it, and then laminate on the 1/4 inch cherry plywood. However, if you're okay with staining it, you can just stain the birch plywood and it'll look very close. There are a couple of different ways you can install edge banding. Now of course it'll start out by applying glue on the back edge of it. Then to hold it in place you can use these fancy edge banding clamps, but with strips this thin you may want to use a caul to back it up. You could tape it in place until the glue sets up, or you can use a micro pin nailer. Now you could use brads, but they leave a little bit larger head and it's rather unsightly. So a micro pin nail also is an excellent option. These strips that I've just been ripping are 3/4 inches thick by 1/2 inch wide. I already cut them off to length before ripping the boards and sanded the faces smooth, so we're done with that step. Now we need to machine a slight rabbet along the one edge, and we'll do that here at the table saw. What we want is a 1/32 deep by a 1/4 inch high rabbet in this area, and that will provide clearance for the drawer as it goes in and out of the cabinet. As you can see, I'm installing the drawer runners now. I'm just going to be using glue, no mechanical fasteners, and I want to be careful how I orient the drawer supports. That rabbet that we machined will be down or towards the bottom, and the full 3/4 inch width goes into the slot. So just put it in, and then as you can see, I'm clamping it in place with some spring clamps. With such a large project, it makes sense to build everything up in little sub-assemblies. So right now I'm going about assembling the two sides. Now all I want to assemble at this point is to get the two sides pulled together with the 3 rails and the 2 field panels. The field panels are natural wood, so we want to make sure we don't get any glue in this groove that would bind up that panel from expanding and contracting. Rail in first, and then we can bring the top and bottom field panels into position. And we can put the top and bottom rails in. And we're good and square. Now I can throw one more clamp across this middle rail, and then we can let it sit and dry for about an hour or two. As you can see with the plywood bottom, I've already got it ripped to width, cut to length, and I've got my dados machined in it. And I did the dados when I was doing the other dado operations. Now what I need to do is cut out these corner notches to accommodate the legs. The plywood panels that we'll be using for the top shelves, I've already ripped to width, cut to length, and I've edge banded them so that the front edge of the plywood is concealed. And here again, we got to cut out the corners to fit around our edge banding on the carrier panels as well as around the stile at the back. So we'll get all those cuts done over at the bandsaw. After some wrestling through a couple of dry assemblies, we're now ready to final assemble everything. I'm going to start out with the left side and our left drawer carrier panel. Now I've already laid down a bead of glue, and in this case I'm just using yellow glue. What I want to do is carefully line up the top edge of the carrier panel with the top end of the legs. Now because clamps would interfere with the rest of the assembly, what I'm going to do is drive some 1 1/4 brads through this carrier panel into the legs, and that'll hold it in good and tight. Now I'll go ahead and start putting in the back panel pieces, and because I want plenty of open time during this part of the assembly, I'm going to be using a polyurethane glue. Now you can use a liquid hide glue. Either one will give you plenty of working time. So I'm going to get my glue in the mortise and on the tenon joints and get that back panel in place. And now with the back panel in place, we can tip it over on its back, and that will help make installing the center divider a lot easier. And now we can get some glue in the dado that receives the top left shelf. And we'll get some glue in the stile along the back where that center divider fits. And we can bring that into position. Now we can glue up and bring in the other side panel. Get the top and bottom rails in. And as we move along, we can start adding in some clamps. Now to help make sure that our drawers sit in these openings nice and square, I've taken the time to cut up a couple of pieces of plywood, one near the top and one near the bottom. And what I've done is I've slid them in between our drawer supports, and when I machined them I made sure it was very square with everything. Now what I can do that they're wedged in here, I can look at the gap on either corner. Now in this case I'm open here and I'm open here, so that tells me that the center divider needs to go down just a little bit. So I'll just tap that down until my edges are nice and even. Well, I think that should do it. We've got everything clamped up, everything's good and square, just where we want it. Now after the glue sets up for a little while, we'll then go about installing the bottom and this upper right shelf. The bottom gets held in place using 3 cleats. 1 cleat along the back rail, 1 cleat up along the front rail, and another cleat over there on the right-hand side. Now all I'm doing, I've clamped a couple of blocks up on top against the top edge of the bottom rail, and I'm pushing the base up against that as a reference or a guide so I don't get my shelf up too high. Once I get everything positioned properly, I'll tack it in place with some 1-inch brads. I just finished laying out the 2 pieces that are used to hold up the clothes rod. I've got the location where I need to drill the 1.25" hole, and then the radius on the left edge piece. Then on the right side piece, I've laid out the 3-inch radius, the location for the 1.25" hole in the center, and then there's a 5/8 inch radius at this location where it blends back out. So I'm going to use my Forstner bit to cut that 1.25" diameter here, 5/8 radius, in these 2 locations, and then we'll punch the hole for the clothes rod as well. Then the bandsaw makes it real easy to cut out the profile. What I'm doing now is I'm getting ready to install our right side shelf and the clothes rod. Now that left bracket gets screwed to this side piece, but we actually want the screws to come through from the back side so that they're not visible. So what I've done is carefully laid out the location where that left hanger will be. Then I drilled 2 holes through so I would have a location on the back side, and then I countersunk the back side. Now we can screw that bracket in place. The right side hanger gets held in place with 2 pocket hole screws, one at each end along the top edge. Now I've got some blocks in place here that show me where the top edge of the shelf is going to be. So first we'll drill the pocket holes, then we can install our hanger. And the Craig pocket hole jig makes drilling these pocket holes very easy. With the rod and right hanger bracket loosely installed on the right side, we can tighten up our left bracket first using 1.25" wood screws. Using a couple little pieces of the cherry plywood as shims, what I want to do is bring that right hanger up against those stops that I installed. Then we'll kind of clamp it up in place crudely. And we'll make sure that the right hanger is tight against the plywood sides and drive those screws home. Then with a little bit of twisting and turning, you can get the top shelf in through the top opening and then slide it down. Making sure it's seated up inside our dado over here and then on top of the right hand support. And if you want, go ahead and tack it in place with a couple of brads. But by going through this process of using these screw fasteners, should this clothes hanger rod ever break, you can actually get at it to replace it. Well, as you can see, we've got a mountain of drawers to make. Now to get started, I took my 1/2" thick material, ripped it to its 6-inch width, and then cut off each of the side, front, and back pieces to their proper overall length. The next step was to start the dovetailing operation. Now I set up for a through dovetail because I think it looks good for this application. Now using one of the templates from the Keller dovetail system, I cut the dovetails on each of the drawer sides. And as easy as that, I've got my dovetails. Then, switching over to the other jig, I cut the pins on the drawer fronts and backs. And with that machining, we've got our pins machined on the front and back panels. The setup and operation went real smoothly with the Keller system, and it worked out real well overall. Now our next step is to cut some grooves to accept the plywood bottom panel. Now we'll do that over here at the router table. Just as we did with our stiles and rails, I'm using a 1/4 inch diameter router bit. I've got it set a 1/2 inch away from the fence and raised up a 1/4 inch. I also took the time to place some masking tape on the fence to mark the leading and trailing edge, because we do have to make stop cuts on the 2 side pieces. Now on the front and back pieces, we can cut our groove all the way through because the end of it will be blocked by the tail in the side piece. Now on the side pieces, we don't want to come all the way through because that would be showing on the front of the drawer. Over here at the drill press, I've gone through, bored a 1 inch diameter finger pull hole that will serve as our drawer pull. It's centrally located left to right and 7/8 of an inches down from the top. And everything's fitting up good. Now I can take it back apart and we can do final assembly on the drawers. Using yellow woodworking glue, I'll put some glue around each of the dovetails, sockets, and pins. Then with good fitting dovetails, you should be able to pretty much push them together. Now we can slide the bottom in, and you'll notice that I'm building the drawer up on its side. Just seems to work a little bit better for through dovetails. Then we throw a couple clamps on there to pull everything in good and tight and check it for square. Measuring across the diagonals, I should get identical measurements, and I do. If it was out of square, I would throw a clamp on the long diagonal measurement and then squeeze it in until they're both the same. This groove that I just machined in the drawer side is centrally located top to bottom. It's 3/4 inches wide and a 1/4 inch deep. To machine that, I've installed my 3/4 inch stacked dado head cutter and set my rip fence at 2 5/8 inches. Then it's just a matter of passing the drawer over the dado cutter. Now I will warn you that you'll get chip out or tear out on the fronts and backs of your drawers. So make sure you clamp on a backer board so that you don't get that tear out. And that fits up nicely. Now I'll go through, sand up the last 2 drawers, cut the dados, and then we can move on. You can also see that I've mounted up the hardware, the 2 hinges, to support the doors. The hinges are located 4 inches down and 4 inches up. Just a matter of drilling the holes and installing the screws. After trimming the top to length, I then ripped it to width and sanded the edges up smooth. I also sanded a small radius here at the outside front corners. In my handheld router, I've got a 3/4 inch radius roundover bit, and I'm not going to cut the full radius. I'm just going to cut about, we'll say about 7/8 inch of it. And I'm going to be cutting that large radius on the bottom surface. So I've got the top upside down at this point. Now I'll go through and take a series of cuts. This is a large router bit, so I don't want to take it all in one pass. Now I flip the top back over so that the top side is up, installed a 1/4 inch radius roundover bit, and made one pass around. Now what I'll do is I'll slightly blend together these 2 radii using some sandpaper, hand sanding it. To fasten the top of the cabinet on, we're going to be using these little metal clips. And we need to cut some slots to accept this clip. And the biscuit joiner is a great tool to do that. I've set my fence up so that the distance from the top edge of the rails down to the top edge of the slot is a 1/2 inch, and it's just a matter of cutting 2 slots in each of the surfaces. Now our next step is to put on our walnut diamond appliques. After taking a moment to lay out the locations, I can use the bandsaw to cut away the waste material. After cutting the shape on the bandsaw, I've taken my random orbit sander with very fine sandpaper, straightened out the edges, and beveled the edges slightly. I also rounded over the sharp points. Then I very carefully measured and centered up the applique on top of the diamond area on our rails. The next step was to make 4 very small marks showing me where the 4 corners are going to be. Then we take tape and mask off the area so that if we get glue squeeze out, it's not going to be a big mess. So we just line up the edge of the tape with those 4 marks. Doesn't take a lot of glue, just want to cover the surface. Then with the glue spread around, we very carefully place it back in the area and then tape it down. After getting all the tape on, you may want to put a heavy weight on there to help the 2 pieces bond together. When staining up the interior, you can kind of pick and choose how you want to do it. Now, if you do decide to stain the inside, you'll want to stain this area, and in this area. There's no need to stain the area where the drawers go. On the areas on the outside of the cabinet where we've already stained the field panels, you do want to be a little bit careful when applying the stain along these edges. If you want, you can mask it off, but keep in mind, tung oil is a sealer, so if we do get a little bit of this stain mixture on the field panel, if you wipe it off right away, you'll never know it was there. As you already saw, we applied the tung oil stain to the field panels of the Armoire. Now we'll be staining the rest of the project. Now the procedure and the mix for my stain is a little bit unusual, but it gives me the results that pleases my eye. Now I don't like a heavy-bodied stain on cherry. Cherry is just a beautiful wood by itself, but the different boards of cherry can be slightly different colors, so I like to unify that color by adding another color to it. In this case, I take a tung oil sealer and stain, a clear product, and I mix in about a 20% amount of a red mahogany tung oil sealer and stain with a red mahogany pigment in it. I simply take a foam brush, wipe it on the surface, take a dry rag, wipe off the excess. 1 coat should do it. Then after it soaks in for a few seconds, wipe off the excess. And of course, if you want, wipe off the area if you got any on the field panel first. Tung oil by itself is considered a finish, and it's perfectly fine to leave it as it was with just the tung oil, or perhaps applying a couple of extra coats of tung oil. However, I like a little more build on my projects, so I use an oil and urethane top coat product. And it's a wipe-on product, so all you really have to do is apply it with a lint-free cloth and wet the surface evenly. Then using that same lint-free cloth, you even out the finish by wiping lightly with the grain. It's a very easy to apply top coat, and it yields beautiful results. I'll apply 2 coats of this, sanding lightly with 600 grit sandpaper between coats. Well, as you can see, this is the completed armoire. Now there are a couple more details that you need to tend to. For instance, you do need to fasten the top onto the case. Now use number 6 by 1/2 inch long sheet metal screws and those metal clips to tighten the top onto the case. Before installing your drawers, you may want to wax the drawer runners as well as the sides of the carrier panels, and that will allow the drawers to slide in and out effortlessly for many years. Reinstall your doors with the hinges and select a door pull to fit your style. Other than that, this wraps up this project. I'm Chris DeHut for Woodworking at Home magazine. Thanks for watching.
I sincerely hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you truly enjoyed it, please help us share this information with the rest of the communities. Please hit the subscribe button Give us a big thumbs up and be sure to tell your friends about this channel. Thanks again for watching.